All right. Can everybody see the slideshow clear? Yep. Okay.
Yep.
All right. Well, first off, thanks for having me. I hope that we are able to do these in person again someday. As Michael said, I got my first vaccine, so we're part of the way there. But yeah, for now, we'll do this virtually, and it seems to work pretty well in the meantime. So thanks all for coming. So today we're going to be looking at saltwater and freshwater pelagics. So pelagic trips, I'm sure you've heard of them. When people think pelagic, they think go on a boat and go out into the ocean. But I would say that they can occur on freshwater as well. So first we're going to be taking a few trips out to North Carolina here, and then we'll be taking it back home to Lake Michigan. So let's get rolling. So in June of 2015, myself and 3 other birders, Rick Brigham, who's watching right now, along with Matt Heisel and Rhoda Johnson, who are from Berrien County, we all got the idea to go down to Hatteras, North Carolina, in the Outer Banks, as you can see there, and do the seabirding pelagic trips. These are run by Brian Pattison and Kate Sutherland, who have been doing this for decades. I don't know exactly how long, but they're some of the best in the business, especially in the Atlantic. And they kind of bicker like an old married couple, but they are not. They're just coworkers, and a lot of fun to be around and very skilled, as I'll get into later. So it's about a 1,000-mile drive, as you can see here, from, I think that's Douglas, Michigan there to Hatteras. So, you know, Google says 15 hours, 39 minutes, but realistically, well over 16 hours to get there. So it's quite a trip. There's actually a couple different ways you can take that we've taken before, through West Virginia or going through the majority of North Carolina. But either way, you have to cross the Appalachians to get there. So if you're not going to fly, it's quite a drive, but I think it's worth it. So we arrived the first night. Rhoda had a sweet connection. She had a friend whose house was going to be empty and we could stay there. So it doesn't really get any better than that. So we had this nice house to stay in for the couple days we were there. And right behind it, we had this nice salt marsh. So the evening before our first pelagic trip, we walked out in the salt marsh here, particularly looking for seaside sparrow, since they had been seen there. No luck with the seaside sparrow this time. We did get some other wildlife. This is a Halloween pennant dragonfly. So one of our most distinctive dragonflies. We actually have them here in Michigan as well. As far as other wildlife went, when the sun went down, we heard these weird, like, it sounded like sheep going bah, bah out in the salt marsh. And we were like, what on earth is that? And after some quick Googling, we found out they were narrow-mouthed toads. So that was a new one for me. And if you ever hear sheep calling from a salt marsh, that should be your first suspect. So I don't think we need an identification on this one. That is the moon. So we had a nice clear night, but a not so clear morning. So it was pretty cloudy, really windy. There were some rain showers out there. So a little bit of yucky weather for your first pelagic trip, perhaps, but we braved the seas anyway. So there's a shot of Rhoda. And there's Rick looking jolly as always, getting his camera ready. Okay, so the chum. This is an important part of pelagic trips. Maybe not everybody's favorite, but it's vital to the process. So this is actually shark liver, and this is Kate cutting up the shark liver here. And the birds just love this stuff. They just swarm it once it goes out there. But other things that they do is from these rails you can see in the back there, they will hang basically a suet cage, a big suet cage full of fish leftovers, fish guts, and those come frozen and they just kind of melt throughout the day and go off into the water, so they can be eaten and smell and attract all these seabirds to the slick behind the boat. And they will also do like a jug of menhaden oil, which is a type of smelly fish oil. with a hole poked in the bottom of it. So the whole time that oil is just dripping into the water and attracting in these seabirds behind the boat. So we started to get into our first pelagic species out there. Hard to see, as things often are with seabirding, but that's a great shearwater on the right and a storm petrel, more than likely Wilson's, just to the left of it there. Kind of hard to see, but you can see the white rump poking out there. And I purposefully didn't align the horizon right in this picture just to show you how rocky the boat was. And these are often the conditions you have when viewing the birds or photographing them. So a little bit of geography here. Why Hatteras? Why did they do some of the most popular Atlantic pelagic trips from Hatteras, North Carolina? Well, this map shows the where the continental shelf drops off here. And this also correlates roughly to where the Gulf Stream comes up and brings some nice warm water that a lot of these species like black-capped petrels. They really love the Gulf Stream. And you can see that shelf break there is pretty close to land. It's closer than you're going to find in South Carolina and Virginia, in New Jersey. So that gives them a real advantage for getting out there into the Gulf Stream. And I think that's about 30 miles at closest there. So a lot of the time spent on a day on the boat in Hatteras is spent getting out to the shelf break. It takes, I forget exactly, an hour, possibly even 2 hours just to get out there, and then that long to go back in. And you can get some of these pelagic species while you're going to and from the shelf break, but a lot of the time you'll be getting more near shore stuff and, you know, things that you can get on shore, like least terns, royal terns, that sort of thing. So here's one of the most common species out there, and I think one of the most pretty. So this is a great shearwater. This one was right off the stern of the boat here. So many of you may know albatrosses, shearwaters, petrels, and storm petrels are part of the order Procellariiformes. Try saying that 10 times fast. And these are commonly known as tube noses for these tube-like structures they have on their nostrils here. And many people associate these tubes with expelling salt water, which they do. This is important to their survival. They can drink seawater and expel the salt and be fine and survive out on the ocean for months at a time. However, other seafaring birds like pelicans and gulls can also expel salt fairly well. So a lot of research is actually being done on these structures here and showing it's not just for expelling salt, but it may also have to do with their olfactory sense. So these seabirds have very well-developed olfactory bulbs. So they can smell a fish from miles away. And that's how on these pelagic trips, they draw in all these birds to the boat, and who knows how far they come from, because there's really not a lot out there on the ocean per se. It's even they will call it a desert habitat. So it's not teeming with birds. So, you know, to get a group of storm petrels and a bunch of shearwaters around the boat, they have to do this chumming and draw them in from all corners of the ocean, so to speak. Yeah, other research on these structures here has shown they may help with the olfactory sense, and also I read something that with albatrosses, they may help them sense pressure as they navigate air currents. So that's pretty cool. I don't know much else about that, but hopefully more research is being done there. So one of the staples out here is the sargassum weed. This is a type of algae that sometimes forms really thick mats on the surface. I don't think I've ever seen it quite like that, but still quite a bit of sargassum weed will be smattered across the surface. And this is an ecosystem of itself. A lot of the birds depend on it. Flying fish will lay their eggs in it. And it's a really cool plant. You can see in this close-up picture here, the air bladders that this uses to float. So that's how they stay on top of the surface. And you can see the Sargasso Sea is named after the sargassum weed. And this is a gyre formed by all these various currents that go around here. So this is the Gulf Stream, which turns into the North Atlantic drift here and is responsible for giving Europe a fairly warm climate relative to their latitude. So just in that little bit of sargassum weed that Kate pulled up, we had, a bunch of little things. We had, this is a file fish on the left, a really skinny fish, and then a type of swimming crab. So very cool stuff to see. So here we are in the back of the boat. This is Rick here, and a father-son duo from Pennsylvania. We had originally planned to be on a smaller boat that they owned called the Skua, and it was originally meant to be a smaller trip, but because of the rocky seas, they actually put us on their big boat known as the Stormy Petrel 2. So a boat that was normally for 25 people to be on, it was 6 of us, so quite nice. We had a lot of one-on-one with the guides and a lot of elbow room. So on the left, we have people having a good time. On the right there, that is Matt having not so much of a good time. I don't put that in there to embarrass him necessarily, maybe a little, but just to show the dangers of seabirding, as I'm sure some of you are aware of. He had a very, very bad time the entire day. So he lost all the contents of his stomach and was just groaning the entire day. So he didn't quite have as good of a day as we did. So here's just a picture of what it looks like off the back of the boat. These are all Wilson storm petrels here. They kind of just pick at the surface of the water with their legs. And it's one of the most common species that you'll find out in the Atlantic there. They can be told apart from other storm petrels by their smaller size, at least compared to leeches and bandrumped, and then they have yellow webbing in the toes, which you can't see in this photo, but if you get a good look, you can see it. And here's one of the jewels. This is the black-capped petrel. This one's, I believe it's actually vulnerable to extinction, so not a real common seabird, but they get them on pretty much every trip out there in Hatteras. So one of the gems out there. So it's easy to fall asleep on a boat. So afternoon's a great time to take a nap, and you can usually be assured that if they see something good, they'll hoot and holler and you'll be able to get up and see it in time. So not a bad idea to nap like Rhoda is there. This is another common shearwater out there, the Cory shearwater. They're pretty distinctive because of their yellow bill there. But there's a catch. So the European authorities have split Cory shearwater into 2 species, which the American authorities have not yet, and I'm not sure if they will in the near future, but we have Corys and then we have Scopoles, and Scopoles breeds in Europe, so they're not as local as the Corys are, but they still say that like 10 to 15% of the Corys they get off North Carolina are Scopoles. And this is just kind of one example of how difficult some of these seabirds are to identify and how much their taxonomy is still in question. There is a lot to learn yet with seabirds. Even some of the fairly common seabirds, they don't even know where they nest. Or they have not discovered, the majority of their nesting colonies. But anyway, for a more advanced lesson here, Scopoles has more white that goes out into the primaries here and is a little bit more petite in size. Not something that I'm real well versed in. It takes the experience that Kate and Brian have to really tell things like this apart in the field. And their skill in doing so is just incredible. So they had some various resources on the boat there to look at. So this is by Steve Howell, who's authored quite a few of my favorite books to North American birding, and he comes out on the Hatteras trips fairly often. And this was just an identification key to some of the flying fish that are out there, which are some of my favorite things to see out there. You can frequently see them jumping away from the boat. And the reason they jump out of the water is to escape predators. So they are frightened by the boat and they jump up. and I saw one of them glide for 10 seconds once, and other people have seen them glide for longer. So these are just really cool to see. And this identification key, the flying fish are like seabirds, not super well known, even though they're a common species across much of the planet's surface. So there were some funny names in there, unofficial names, I think. One of them was called Odd Spot Midget, which kind of sounds like a playground insult, but it's also a flying fish name. So there you go. So these are the common storm petrels that you get out there. If you're having trouble telling these apart, you're not alone. So do I, and so do a lot of other birders who go down there on the boat. Top right is a Wilson's. The bottom right is a Leach's, just because that pale bar on the wing actually reaches the very front of the wing, which is a difficult thing to see when you're out there on the water. And then on the left is a band rumped. So the plumage is slightly different between these, but the flight style is the main way that Brian and Kate tell them apart. One of them flies more like a nighthawk. One of them has, quicker wing beats, and they're just able to tell this from a rocking boat from 100 meters away. It's really incredible. I don't know how they do it. So that was the end of the first day. We started to go out on the second day and ran into a little issue, and that was thunderstorms. So we came back in and they said, hey, you have a rain check. Whenever you make it back out here, you get a day free. And we said, okay, sounds good. Good excuse to come back. So we did a little land birding in the meantime. Matt had actually stayed behind that day to begin with, which was understandable. So this is the Cape Hatteras lighthouse here, and it is about 200 feet tall. And that makes it one of the tallest lighthouses in the world. In fact, I think the only thing that could even be vaguely considered a lighthouse in the US that's taller would be the Statue of Liberty. So here's Rick and Matt here. We're at Pea Island looking for some land birds. And we go forward in time about a year to August 2016. So just Rick and I went out here this time to use our rain check. Matt and Rhoda had gone at a different time. And we decided to apply our rain check to a 3-day weekend, which is really cool. I think they still do this every year in August. They do 3 trips in a row, whereas usually they just do, 1 or 2 day weekends. And being on a ship for 3 days is a lot better than 1. So it was a great opportunity. We have a horseshoe crab here, of course, and a beach teeming with black skimmers. They actually had many beaches closed in the Outer Banks for seabird nesting, including for piping plovers, which some of the locals don't love. They don't get to ride their dune buggies out there, but in my opinion, that's for the best. So Rick and I decided to camp this time around. So here's our lovely campsite here. This was right across from the boat dock in Hatteras, and a short walk from the ocean. So this is on the ocean side, not the sound side of the barrier island. And the night we went out here, we had, I forget how many, like 60 black terns flying by, which was the most I had seen before. So Outer Banks is just a beautiful area to go, even if you don't get to go out on a boat. So highly recommend it. So we had a nice sunrise and a busier boat. There were birders from all over on the boat. And I got to meet a lot of really cool people. And the person indicated by the arrow here is Christian Hagenlocker. And he happened to be doing a big year in 2016. So this was his, trip to get all these Atlantic coast specialties for the year. So we actually got to talking to him quite a bit, and he actually ended up staying in our campground the next couple nights. So that was really cool that in the midst of this big year, we got to spend a couple days with Christian here. And he was doing interviews for various people for something he had going called the Birding Project. And he's actually since authored a book on this big year called Falcon Freeway. There are also 3 guides on the boat then to help out Brian and Kate. So there was a lot of expertise, a lot of eyes out there. So here are some Corey shearwaters again with their yellow bills. And we're not the only boat out there. There's cruise lines, freight ships out there. And then here we have a bottlenose dolphin. Never have had a whale on these trips. They get a couple kinds of the beaked whales, but you just never know what you're going to have as far as marine life goes. But you're likely to get something else cool besides birds on their pelagic trips, and they know all about the other marine life as well. This is actually a screenshot from a video which I have on YouTube. Feel free to email me if you want the link, but so these are Atlantic spotted dolphins that were swimming with the boat for a while. So very, very cool to see. And this is a bridled tern, one of the 2 pelagic tern species that get out there, bridled and sooty. And those things will just land on any debris they can find out there to rest. I think we had one on a flip-flop one of the days. I don't know if I have a picture of that, but and again, anything that's out there, they'll land on to rest, because terns don't like to land on the water. And this is a young bridled tern here. There it is flying away. It's easy to get really nice backgrounds out there with those nice blue waters behind. And this is the kind of view that you often get when you're trying to photograph things out there. This is a great shearwater in the midst of taking off. And this was one of the huge highlights on the first day. We had actually not 1, but 2 at various points in the day, white-tailed tropic birds. This is one of 3 tropic bird species in the world, and they get the white-tailed and the red-billed off North Carolina at times. Red-tailed, you might have to go to Hawaii or somewhere else for, though. Here's another look at the black-capped petrel. One of the ways to identify these is their really distinct white rump. This is pretty obvious from a distance when you're on the boat there. You can usually tell them apart just with binoculars. And this is a leatherback sea turtle. And an Audubon shearwater. This is a smaller shearwater than the great and the Corys. They're kind of plain black and white plumage, but really fun to watch. They're really acrobatic. They love to pick at the sargassum weed for little fish or whatever else they might be finding. So one of the nice birds to see out there. This is a flying fish mid-takeoff. I was not able to get a shot like this with my camera, but luckily one of the guides, Chris, was able to. So day 2 of 3 was kind of a break in the action, so to speak. With pelagic birding, it's always a mystery box what you're going to get. Some days are going to be better than others. So kind of the rule that I've developed is if you're going to do pelagic trips and you have the option, try doing 2 days in a row or 3, because even if both of those 2 days that you went out are a little below average, you're going to see something one day that you aren't going to see the other day. So, you'll have more to hang your hat on at the end of the trip. They are a little expensive though, so it's a bit of a splurge, but I think it's worth it. So on the second day, some of you might be squinting there and able to see that this is a hammerhead shark. You can see that hammerhead in the water there. And this is a seagoing shorebird. I'm sure many of you are familiar with these because we do get them in Michigan. This is a red-necked phalarope. We had a small group of them way out there. Oh, and yeah, here's the bridal tern on a sandal. Really fun shot there. And a loggerhead sea turtle. So 2 different kinds of sea turtles out there. So here we are on the way back in. On the second day, you can see that lighthouse from many, many miles away. So it's there to greet you on your way back in. Oh, so this is the restaurant that we ended up eating at with Christian after the pelagic. And on the door there, it says shirt and shoes required, also pants, which I think is good advice. And I have to imagine that now they added and also masks onto that as well. So we went out to eat here, and Christian told us all about the stories from his big year, a lot of really interesting stuff. He had actually managed to get out to the Outer Banks by flying out there, and he had left his driver's license at home. So he had to like weasel his way with the employees of the rental car to not actually check that he had his driver's license before they gave him the rental car. And he was actually able to do it and get out there in his rental car. So I imagine that's the kind of hectic stuff that you deal with when you're doing a big year all across the US. So this was the third and final day of this trip. There's Kate scanning from the bow there. And these are sooty terns. So this is in contrast to the bridle terns we saw earlier. So they have, the juveniles are different from juvenile bridle terns. They're all dark, as we can see on the one on the right here. And this youngster was just following the parent around here begging for food. It was really cute. But the adult sooty terns have darker backs rather than gray backs and a little bit less white on the forehead than bridleds. So fairly similar. And this was the biggest treat by far. On near the starboard bow, and I heard Brian come over the loudspeaker, and I couldn't even hear what it was. Something off the starboard side. And then I look, and right there's a white-faced storm petrel, which is a really good bird in North Carolina. So this was in 2016, and their last one off North Carolina had been in 2009. So not a species that makes it to those warm waters off North Carolina very often. They've had a few since, but still quite a cool bird. Very acrobatic, very long legs, very distinct storm petrel. And that's just to look at their range. So they're starting to see more of them off of Massachusetts and other pelagic trips out there, but still pretty rare off North Carolina. But they occur many different places throughout the world, as many of these seabirds do. Oh yes. So you win some, you lose some, especially on pelagics. This is true. Rick and I, at one point, just so happened that we were the only participants sitting on the bow of the boat, and the other 20-some people were on the stern just by random chance. You always move around throughout the day. And they had a long-tailed Jaeger fly up the slick and then fly out, not to be seen again. And once a bird's gone, when you're out there on the ocean, it's hard to find them back. They just kind of go off into the horizon and they're gone. They're vanished. And before we could get back there, it was gone. We did not see another one. And later that day, Rick and I just so happened to be the only ones on the stern of the ship, and everybody else was on the bow when they had a Manx shearwater buzz by the bow and then off into the ocean. So we missed that one too. So just some things you can expect to happen if you do one of these trips. There's Rick. I put this embarrassing picture of him in there just because I knew he would be watching. There's him after having a little seasickness episode. Not as bad as Matt had the year before, though. We also learned some lessons from this. Do not take carrots or bananas on a boat. I did not know either of these before I went, but they say you don't want to have carrots because, should you get seasick, those really hurt coming up. They're pretty hard little chunks. And interesting story on the banana one. So I was browsing my Facebook at some point after these trips, and I'm not sure how it came on there, but I saw a post from somebody who maybe tagged like seabirding pelagics in their post. And it was somebody I didn't know, but who had been on the boat on the second day. And they said, oh, we've had terrible luck this second day. We've missed great shearwater and a lot of other birds. And it was because this guy here was eating a banana. And it was a picture of me eating a banana on the boat. So I said, okay, I guess I'm responsible then. So I won't be taking bananas on those boats anymore then, just out of superstition. They also will do fishing on their boat there. They can even charter fishing trips. And on the way back in, they decided to put in a couple lines. And this is a wahoo. I think University of Virginia's sports teams are even nicknamed Wahoo. Somebody might know more about that than I, but it's a big predatory fish and one of the only ones that can swim fast enough to grab the bait when the boat is going at full speed. And when you spend enough days out there in the sun, you tend to earn a birder tan. So this is my binocular strap tan. And here is the drive home, complete with my lucky pelican, who is sitting right over there right now. Okay, so the last trip I did out to North Carolina was in May of 2019. This was during their spring blitz. So in late May to early June every year, they do about 2 weeks where they run pelagics every day, which they don't for the rest of the year. The rest of the year is a lot more spotty of a schedule. And this is often when they get some of the really cool rarities out there. So May is a good time to bird in Michigan, but should you want to take a vacation in North Carolina, that's also a good time to do it. That's when they get rarities like Fay's petrel, Bermuda petrel, European storm petrel, or even something even better, which I'll show here shortly. So I had flown out to North Carolina to meet my parents, actually. I had been working in Texas. So we decided to do something a little new and visit Ocracoke Island, which is next to Hatteras Island, and you have to get there by ferry there. That's not my hippie van down there, although I wish it was. It's a great van. Here's the lighthouse in Ocracoke and beautiful sunset. And another look. In this one, you'll notice the cat that's on the boardwalk there. Interesting thing about this cat is I looked at a brochure for Ocracoke Island later, and that is the very same cat. So it must live nearby there. It's kind of the greeter when you're on the island, I guess. So I decided to take a walk in this other salt marsh here on Ocracoke to try to get seaside sparrow, which, as you remember, I missed a few years ago when I was down here. So I had been hoping to see this bird for a few years at this point, and lo and behold, there it was. Really cool species that lives along the Atlantic coast from southern Texas all the way up to, I think, Maine. So I kind of broke my rule for this. I just did 1 day on the pelagic, so I broke my 2-day rule, but I thought 1 day was better than no days. So still very much worth it because we got a city shearwater here, which was new for me. There's a closer view of a city shearwater. These birds are known for their really huge migrations across the oceans. Many of them will do a huge figure 8 pattern in the Pacific and travel tens of thousands of miles in a year. So kind of a cosmopolitan range for this species, but they get them irregularly off North Carolina. And this was another very cool species, definitely an ABA rarity. So early in the day, this petrel, kind of like a black-cap petrel, but with a dark rump, buzzed by the boat. And because of that dark rump, I knew it was a different kind of petrel. And the guides, frantically took pictures of it. And it just buzzed by the boat and it was gone. So not a very good look. It didn't do, multiple passes or anything like that. But just buzzed by the boat and it was gone. And they were able to piece out from this photo that it was a Trindaja petrel. If you're confused about the pronunciation, everybody is. So don't feel bad about that. Trindaja is the Portuguese word for Trinity, and it's named after an island off the coast of Brazil where the species nests. But a lot of people call them Trinidad petrel, which is the Spanish word for Trinity. So you'll hear that as well. And that's a better view of what a Trindaja petrel will look like. They're quite variable. They have different color morphs. So here's just some other possibilities you can get in North Carolina, which I haven't had luck with, but again, you never know what you're going to get out there. Each day is different. So that's a South Polar skua in the upper left. This is a masked booby here. Razorbill in the top right, which is something they'll get there in the winter. In the winter, it's another story there. It's colder and they get alcids which includes, auks and puffins, those sorts of birds. Those will be there in the winter, but not in the summer. European storm petrel is also here on the right. That's a rarity that they get on a certain percentage of trips they do in the summer. This is a Bermuda petrel in the lower left, also known as a cahao. That's a highly coveted bird to get in US waters. And then last but not least, Tahiti petrel, probably their craziest rarity they've had there. This bird is usually found in the South Pacific, and this was the first Atlantic Ocean record they had. This was in May 2018, I think. So the year before I had gone there for the spring blitz. Some very lucky people got to see a Tahiti petrel in the Atlantic Ocean. Just bizarre. I don't know if anybody knows how these seabirds get lost like this or how they do it, but really incredible stuff. So back to freshwater. Can we adopt their style? Can we find some of these really hard to see birds from land by taking a boat out into Lake Michigan? This goes back to September of 2013 when Michigan Audubon ran a couple pelagics off of St. Joe. This is the party time fishing charter there, and it was a full group. So I was one of the co-leaders. So I was tasked with throwing bread and popcorn out to the gulls to chum. So that was my job title for this trip. And here's the path we took. So we had a red-necked phalarope 4 miles out, and a Jaeger spa, a really distant Jaeger species, which Jaegers are definitely a rarity on the Great Lakes, particularly long-tailed and Pomeran. Unfortunately, we couldn't get good looks at this one. But those were the only real pelagic species we had on this trip. So not bad, both good birds, but nothing Tahiti petrel-esque. And there's a picture of the red-necked phalarope, which these can occur inland too. There was one at Coopersville Wastewater years ago. So it's also been at Holland State Park. And of course, you can always do some land birding after the pelagic trip. So this is Rick, Allison Vlog, and I. There had been a report of a LeConte sparrow at St. Joe High School the day before. And we thought there's no way that a LeConte sparrow is going to hang around overnight in a lawn next to a high school. It's not their typical habitat. But we looked right by the front door of the school, and lo and behold, LeConte sparrow. There's Rick's picture of it. So with those Michigan Audubon trips behind us, we happen to have a connection. Mary Lou Graham, who lives in Saugatuck, she has an 18-foot whaler here, and she's a globetrotting birder and photographer, and she loved the idea of going out on the boat and looking for these pelagic species. So this is Rick, Caleb, Julie, and I, and you'll see Rick is handing off some dog food to Caleb here. That's actually a fairly recent development. We learned that dog food is a really effective and pretty cheap chum for the gulls. So you just get huge swarms throwing out the dog food. But the herring gulls don't like it. They're a little more picky than the ringbill gulls. This is the other kind of chum we use. One of my favorite pictures ever. This is my car after a trip to Aunt Millie's. So Aunt Millie's will sell off old bread for animal feed, bread that's expired or about to expire. Sometimes we've even found some pretty good loaves in there. So when we get hungry, we just start chowing down on some cinnamon swirl bread that's not quite expired. But anyway, I went to the Aunt Millie's in Walker one day with my friend. We were driving back from school, and I said, hey, I have a little errand for us to do. And I didn't even tell him what it was. We get to Aunt Millie's, and for $10, they said, you know what, we have a huge tub in the back. You can take all that old bread too. Just fill up your car. So we filled up the entirety of my little car all the way to the roof with bread. This is the route we take going out of Saugatuck here. So the boat is docked down here in Douglas. This is Wade's Bayou down here, where when the river was lower, that's where curlew sandpiper was back in 2013, a number of other good shorebirds. And this is Kalamazoo Lake here. And this is all part of the Kalamazoo River, and it empties out here into Lake Michigan. And here you can see the old harbor too, which goes down to Oval Beach. This is where it used to empty out many years ago. So we bird our way from Douglas through these lakes. We often get some good ducks and other things in there. And there's some good forested dunes along here where we look for songbirds. And we have struck gold doing that, as you'll see later. And then we head out to the lake and look for pelagics. Also, I find it interesting that the only business that came up here on Google was Saugatuck Brewing Company. I think Google knows a little bit too much about my habits, perhaps. So back in 2014, we did our first journey from Saugatuck. So the chumming worked. We have a group of gulls following us, even though we're going full speed. They were right there with us. And with these gulls, we were hoping to attract rare kinds of gulls, but especially yagers. So in the fall, yagers, especially young ones, which are usually an oceanic bird, they will get lost. They will migrate over land and find the Great Lakes, and some of them will hang around on the Great Lakes for a while. And they can see, feeding flocks of gulls from miles away. So the idea is if we have this big group of gulls around us, these yagers will come in and give us a really nice view. There's Rick. He's dressed for the elements. You always have to dress warm and prepare to be sprayed by cold Lake Michigan water out there in the fall. So this is a great black-backed gull. This is the largest species of gull in the world. This is an immature bird. This is an adult lesser black-backed gull, so more of a medium-sized gull, told apart from great black-backed by the grayer back and the yellow legs. Really nice picture by Rick here. And then we have the smaller gulls. So this is a Bonaparte's gull here. We have actually seen a little gull too on these trips, but very distantly, and I don't have a picture of that. This Bonaparte's was actually eating popcorn here, which is not probably not the main staple of their diet. They tend to prefer fish and other things to popcorn, but whatever works, works. And it did work. So we have a parasitic yager here. This was the first one I think we had on these trips, and it put on a show. This was a subadult parasitic yager, so really beautiful plumage. You can see the white flashes on the wings here, and just one of my favorite pictures with the dune in the background here. So there are 7 species of yagers and skuas in the world. Of course, in Michigan, we just have the 3 smaller yagers, which are long-tailed pomeran and parasitic. But they all fall under the genus Stercorarius. So interesting tidbit about their genus name. This derives from Latin meaning of dung. And the way they got that name is sailors used to think that when these yagers would attack birds and they would play something else. Oops. All right, so 2015, we had a dark morph parasitic yager here. Yagers are very difficult to tell apart. They have different morphs. They look very, very different between adult and juvenile plumages and very similar between the species. So here's another picture with the dunes in the background. And parasitic yager is our most common in Michigan. It's actually not a review species by the State Record Committee, while long-tailed and Pomeranian yager are review species. And you can see, if you look near Holland here, you can see these two smaller blue pins, and those are our pins out in Lake Michigan from our pelagic trips. So you can see people in Chicago have also been out doing boat trips as well in recent years too. So another kind of more oceanic specific gull that we can get in the fall here in Michigan is black-legged kittiwake. And this is a first cycle. Just gorgeous plumage on this bird. So told apart by Bonaparte's and other gulls by the M on the wing and that distinct color. Really beautiful bird. This one was right off the pier, so we weren't far out on the water to get this one, but put on a good show for us. We'll also get duck migration out there. So this is a mixed dabbler flock. I'm seeing mainly gadwall in there. So you'll get a lot of dabbler diversity early in the fall, and then it kind of switches over to diving duck diversity later in the fall. That's when you get, your scoters and mergansers and such. In here we have some shorebirds. This was right on the pier at the Kalamazoo River mouth here. So that's a black-bellied plover on the left and an American golden plover on the right. They're often hard to tell apart in this plumage, so really cool look at the darker cap and smaller beak of the golden plover on the right there compared to the black-bellied. And not to quiz you, but this one is the black-bellied plover. Another look at it there. And this is the Saugatuck Harbor Natural Area. This is the space between Oval Beach and the Kalamazoo River mouth here. Really beautiful spot for a walk. It's almost a mile from there up to the pier heads, but always well worth it. There's prairie warblers and other cool species that you can get out there. This is a look at us after we've been spending too much time in the sun. So map turtles are another species that we get along the river there, one of my favorite. And another kind of gull here, this is in Iceland. So formerly this was lumped with the Thayers, which had darker wingtips, but now they've lumped them all to be Iceland, although this one still would be in Iceland, even if Thayers were still in existence. So that's a winter visitor to Michigan. And yet another Jaeger here. This is another parasitic with a herring gull. It's interesting. Usually the Jaegers will chase after the gulls, but sometimes the gulls just seem to get sick of it and they'll go after the Jaegers and they'll chase the Jaegers for a little while. So it's always a battle out there. And the gulls will really react to these Jaegers too. They spot them before we do every time, because while we're chumming, we'll have this big group of gulls around us, and then suddenly they just like all fly one direction, or they, all start calling, and we'll know that something's up. This is another look at parasitic Jaeger here. This one's a juvenile. Not going to get into the difficult ID characteristics here, but. And yet another oceanic gull, which is a treat whenever it visits Michigan. This is a Sabin's gull. So this has a really distinct kind of fuller M pattern on the wing, sort of like the kittiwake, but more complete. And then the juveniles have this kind of scaly brown on top. So this is another one that rarely makes it to the Great Lakes, and we're treated to this one buzzing by the boat in 2017. And that was the same day we had another Jaeger, which this one buzzed by the boat and was yet again a parasitic. So we were still always hoping to get long-tailed or Pomeranian Jaegers, but it's always been parasitics. Another highlight from Saugatuck. I can't take much credit for this one. Full disclosure, this was on a Sunday, and I was watching football at home when I got a call. Caleb and Rick and Mary Lou were out, and Caleb had picked out a new gull on the pier from a group of ring-billed gulls. This was a 9th state record, and very, very similar to ring-billed. So here's a comparison shot. This mew gull likely came from the West Coast somewhere. They just have a more petite bill than ring-billed. That's the main way to tell them apart. So a great find by Caleb, and I was able to drive down there. I ran into Lake Michigan up to my knees. They picked me up on the boat and took me back there to see it. So that was nice of them. Black terns are another species that we usually associate them with marshes. You know, they're an inland species when they're breeding for the most part, but early fall they will migrate out on the Great Lakes. So late August is when you'll see a lot of these out on Lake Michigan. And we got treated with some close views of this bird, and we also had a Hudsonian godwit, which is very uncommon shorebird in Michigan. We had one fly past the boat quickly while we were a few miles out there. And here are some of those sea ducks that you'll get later in the fall. This is a group of black scoters flying by. And here's the group dressed for the elements. So this is Caleb and Julie and Mary Lou here, the captain of the ship. So going back to the highlights from last year now, we had some deer swimming in the old channel. So they were in the first third of a triathlon. So after this, they were off to do running and then cycling. And here's a look at the chaos that ensues when we get the gulls going. So they'll be just calling raucously, fighting each other over bread. You know, we like to throw them bread in midair, and they're really good at catching it. So it's quite a lot of fun. So here's some ring-bill gulls getting into it over some expired bread. And this is a young lesser black-backed gull. So fairly similar to a young herring gull, but told apart by the duskiness concentrated around the eye and the more black and white scaly pattern on the back. And this is when we struck gold last year. While we were going up the channel, as I showed you earlier, we were looking through some warbler flocks, and suddenly this bird popped up in a branch right above us, and it was wagging its tail. And a couple of us who saw it, you know, just started hollering. We're like, oh my goodness, look at that, look at that. And it might be hard to tell here, but this is a Kirtland's warbler, an extremely difficult species to get in migration. And based on our location, we suspect that this probably wasn't one from Michigan, like from Grayling or Mayo, but this may have been one of the very few that breeds in Wisconsin. So funnily enough, Rick had actually gotten his Allegan County Kirtland's warbler earlier this year, back in the spring. He had heard one singing in the Allegan State Game Area. So he had the distinction of seeing a Kirtland's warbler away from the breeding grounds, both in spring and fall migration of the same year, which I really don't know if that's ever happened anywhere else before. Really incredible. Here's another view. So we still haven't had luck with the rare Jaegers, as I mentioned earlier. So after doing these trips, you know, fairly regularly in the fall for what, 7 years now, we have to start to wonder, why are we getting just parasitic Jaegers and not long-tailed or Pomeranian Jaegers like we're after? And if you look at the map for long-tailed Jaeger, less common than parasitic Jaeger, but most of the points seem to be concentrated down towards the middle of the lake, you'll notice. And this pen right here, that's kind of in Michigan waters, but east of Chicago. This was a group of Chicago birders who actually went out of New Buffalo and were able to find a long-tailed Jaeger and Savin gull together. And they just got some gorgeous shots of it in Michigan waters, but with the Chicago skyline in the background, and which, you know, still makes us fairly jealous to this day. So why might we be missing long-tailed and Pomeranian Jaegers off of Saugatuck? So one theory is that long-tailed and Pomerans tend to be more pelagic than parasitics. Parasitics are a little bit more likely to fly closer to land. Long-tailed and Pomerans tend to like to be a certain number of miles offshore. So these birds, we suspect, might be further out in the middle of the lake, and kind of concentrating in the middle. And as they migrate south, which I don't know if they think they're on the ocean, but regardless, as they are migrating south down the water, they will all kind of congregate down here right at the southern tip. And this would make sense because down in Miller Beach, Indiana here, which is by Gary here, right at the southern tip, on a good north wind in the fall, it is like Jaeger heaven. They can get Jaegers and kittiwakes and even salmon skulls and other pelagic species in a way that's really tough to do at Michigan lake watch locations. I've spent the day in St. Joe lake watching from the pier in Tiscornia and seen nothing, while at the very same time they were seeing long-tailed parasitic Jaegers and phalaropes down at Miller Beach. So it could be that these birds are out in the middle of the lake and flying straight south, and they're just kind of bottling up down there. So one of our hopes for this coming fall is to actually work the southern part of Lake Michigan a little more, to go out from perhaps New Buffalo and try to kind of go out into the middle there and chum and see what happens. So some other Hail Mary type birds that we hope to get on the Great Lakes at some point are oceanic species like the ones we saw in North Carolina, like the shearwaters, the storm petrels. And these birds will get knocked inland by hurricanes. So hurricanes, of course, are a devastating thing to a lot of people, but we tend to not get that kind of devastation in Michigan. We just get the rains from some of them that come up this far. But one perk is that we may actually get stranded seabird species that got caught in the hurricane. And this has happened before. So in Hurricane Isaac in 2012, you can see the inland path that it took going up from the Gulf inland. It actually knocked a great shearwater to Sleeping Bear Dunes. And this is the only Michigan record of this species. It was discovered one evening by Alice Van Zoren, and her picture is here. And a number of birders rushed up there the next day. And unfortunately, this is the fate that it met. These tube noses are probably not going to do well when they end up here. They expel a lot of salt, and they're not going to get that salt back from drinking water on Lake Michigan, unfortunately. So you have a limited time where you can see these birds once they get stranded here. And just last year, Tropical Storm Cristobal, this did something fairly similar. So it had a path that came up from the Gulf of Mexico and went straight inland. And this one actually knocked a sooty tern into Wisconsin and another into northern Indiana. So Michigan was so close. There are still 0 records of sooty tern in Michigan. So again, here's your sooty tern, like the one seen in North Carolina. This one was found stranded on a parking garage in Wisconsin and taken into rehab. So just a bizarre thing, once in a lifetime thing, if that, probably less than that. And yet other seabirds getting lost can be unpredictable. This is Michigan's only record of Manx shearwater. And this one ended up in a lawn in Macomb County in 2000. And I don't know all the backstory of this one, but there was actually no tropical system that really would have pushed it inland. And this one was actually banded and had been banded 9 years previously in Northern Ireland. And it had come all this way just to end up in Michigan. So this kind of looks like someone spilled yarn or silly string onto the map, but this is just a spaghetti model of hurricanes. As you can see, it's a pretty rare occurrence that we get one that comes as far as Michigan, and the remnants, will actually come into the state. Most of them tend to go along the coast. There's not a lot of nor'easters that cut in and go across Pennsylvania or New York. They have happened before and brought seabirds to Lake Erie. Like Point Pelee in Ontario has actually had a black-capped petrel after such an event, which would be a very bizarre species to get in Michigan. But it is possible when we get that once-in-a-lifetime hurricane, it could happen on Lake Michigan. And you'll see over here in Arizona, a couple very few storms have also cut inland to Arizona, which has resulted in possibly the best yard bird ever in the United States. This was after Hurricane Newton, I believe it was, several years ago, which hit Baja California and then jutted inland into Arizona. And Arizona was swarming with, at least certain sewage ponds and such were, covered in storm petrels, wedge-tailed shearwater, and even this bird, which was a Juan Fernandez petrel, the first US record. This is a species that is found off the coast of Mexico out in the Pacific. And before one had even been found off a boat in Southern California, one was found in the desert in somebody's driveway in Arizona. So strange things can definitely happen. So here's some of our wanted lists for our trips in Lake Michigan. Of course, the rare Jaeger's red phalarope is a common occurrence, or relatively common shorebird, at least to see pelagically. Red-necked phalarope, we had one on the trip in St. Joe, but not from Saugatuck. Frigate birds can happen, or hurricane birds, you never know. So these are all the species that we're out there looking for. And here's the crew, and that is the end. So I have my email address listed below if you want to email me anything, and we're open to questions. Looks like I didn't go too much over time, so that's good.
No, you're good. So we have time for some questions. So if you have questions for Chace, just chime in and ask, and he'll try to answer them. Well, one of the things, Chace, you said that just to give people an idea, those pelagic trips can be kind of pricey. So how pricey is pricey?
Yeah, I actually looked at Seabirding, which is Brian and Kate's company, and I believe the prices were raised to $170 a day. And it's like $5 off if you do 2 or 3 days in a row. Which I think was up from like, I don't know, 150 when we did it, and it was even less before then. But yeah, it's a little expensive, but at least worth it to do a day. Right. I don't know what West Coast pelagics run, and that's another thing I've yet to do.
They're in the same price range, Chace.
Okay.
A little bit more. Some run up to 200.
As you said, it takes a couple hours to get out to the shelf, and then of course a couple hours to get back. How long were you staying out there once you were out there?
I think they say the trips are about 10, maybe 11 hours. You usually start at daybreak. But yeah, you have plenty of time out there in the Gulf Stream to explore. So it's a good day out there.
That's not a bad price for that length of time, actually.
Yeah, definitely would recommend it.
It's a famous area for shipwrecks off of Cape Hatteras.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, maybe Rick knows a little bit more about this, but this is actually where Blackbeard was. You remember anything about that, Rick?
Arr, matey. Yeah, I believe so. I think that was one of his favorite. Ocracoke Island was one of his favorite haunts till he went north and got killed in Massachusetts.
Okay. Yeah, there's a museum there. We have yet to go to that.
When I was in the Navy, we sailed through Hatteras several times. And one storm was so bad, this was on a destroyer, the waves broke out the windows on the bridge. Yeah, and it was an ice storm, so we ended up with 3 or 4 inches of ice on the ship. So we had to string rope on the ship and go out and chip the ice off because it makes you top heavy.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah,
Wow.
that's a dangerous spot out there. I mean, there's a lot of ships that will go down out in that area.
Yeah. The first day that we were out there, when Matt was severely seasick, it was like 12-foot swells. And I think Kate said that the one time where things were a little scary is when they kind of got caught in a storm going back in, and they were worried about the shallow water going in, so they told people to put on life jackets. But that's not something you're usually going to have to worry about there.
And
Yep.
did Matt take Dramamine before he went out? Like, did he anticipate he was gonna have a problem, or was that unexpected for him?
It was unexpected. He's an ER doc, so I trust he knows things fairly well, but I think he had not been seasick on several Pacific trips previously. But when he went back a year later, when he went at a different time than Rick and I, he did a bunch of ginger, took Dramamine, and he was actually fine. So you just never know.
So any more questions for Chace?
Thank you so much.
Yeah, if not, then thank you very much, Chace. And what I'll do is recorded this and I'll upload it tomorrow onto our YouTube channel.
All right.
And let your friends know about it.
Excellent. Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, you're welcome.
Thanks, Chase.
Chace.
Thank you.
You're good.
Great
Thank you.
show.